share her insights on the dismissing employees and some things you can do to mitigate your risks and make the process less stressful. With nearly 20 years of human resource management experience, Janelle offers a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the areas of employee engagement, recruitment, training, and development, performance management, diversity management, and policy creation, and administration and customer service. Janelle is the founder of Spark People Solutions, located in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. She has passion for training and coaching others and on the many HR challenges facing businesses today. Thank you, Janelle, for joining us today, and we can start whenever you're ready.
Can everybody hear me? I hope I'm coming through okay. Can you hear me, Jackie? Great. Okay, just wanted to thank Jackie for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon to talk a little bit about this important topic, employee terminations. Just a couple of housekeeping items. In advance of this webinar, we were doing some testing, and I'm having some difficulties advancing my own slides from here. So the kind ladies are going to advance for me. So when you hear me say next slide, that's just their cue. So just bear with me as we work through that technical difficulty. Also, please feel free to write in your questions in the chat box. Depending on how many questions I get and what kinds of questions there are, I may be able to address them as you ask them on the air for everybody to hear, or I can save time at the end to go over any questions that folks may have as well. So with that said, I'll ask the ladies to advance to our agenda slide. Okay, so what I'd like to go over in the next within the next hour here is a couple of topics. So first of all, I think I would be remiss to talk about this particular subject without first talking about some ways that we can all prevent terminations from happening in the first place. Certainly that's not the focus of today's presentation, but I think it warrants at least one slide, so we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And then the bulk of the presentation, we'll talk about the different kinds and reasons for termination, the importance of documentation throughout the process and leading up to the process, timing and location and the sensitivity around that, preparing the termination letter, calculating severances, things like that. Who should attend the termination meeting? We'll discuss some options there, as well as some logistics and particulars in terms of delivering the message and things to say, things not to say. And then finally, after the fact, what are some things that you should be doing to prepare? So next slide, please. Okay, so how to avoid terminations. Now, certainly this is a topic, separate topic that we could spend another presentation on, but just a couple of points to highlight. So in my experience, certainly being clear and honest during your hiring process in terms of what the job looks like, what the work environment is like, things that they can expect as an employee of your organization, just being very transparent during the recruitment and the onboarding process to be fair to the employee, make sure he or she knows exactly what they've agreed to. Secondly, providing fair and clear employment contracts. So in my opinion, gone are the days where you have a handshake agreement when you're hiring somebody. You should have something on paper. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but just some key points, both for your protection and the employee's protection. I think that's very important. Thirdly, having solid, well-communicated employment policies that are practiced consistently. So I say that because it's all fine and good and very easy to have policies written on paper, but if we're not referencing them or practicing them or applying them consistently, you may as well not have them. Fourthly, providing motivating, enriching work environments. So I think it's fair to say that most people look for that in their work. We spend a lot of time at our work, so it's important to provide environments that are offering these things. And there's lots and lots of different ways that organizations can do this that don't cost a lot of money either. So we just encourage everyone to be creative and find out what might work for your organization. And finally, practicing a fair and transparent progressive discipline process. That kind of goes with my earlier comment about policies, but certainly it is important for you to have a clear and transparent way that you are going to administer discipline or corrective action, whatever the terminology is that you use, and that employees are made aware of that, and that you apply that on a consistent basis. And next slide. All right, so there are two main types of terminations, just cause and without cause termination, and I threw probationary in there as well. But basically, just cause terminations mean that you have really solid reason to eliminate that person from your workplace. So things like theft, willful destruction of company property, perhaps an incident of workplace violence, things like that. Where in this case, when you're terminating somebody with cause, you would not be giving them any severance or any monies at all. It would be a severed relationship, and you would part ways, and there's no money. Without cause are more common, when I say for lots of reasons, but one is that it seems to be in the last few years that just cause is a lot more difficult to prove in the courts. So without cause terminations are quite common, the most common, and basically what that means in a legal sense is you don't have a very good reason to get rid of the employee. Now, in fact, for you, you may have good reasons for your decision, but as far as a legal consideration, they don't see it that way. So with a without cause termination, you would be required to pay some kind of dollar amount. Now, it depends on how much that is, whether you are a provincially regulated organization or a federally regulated organization. And if you are provincially regulated, it depends on the province you're in. So if you're federally regulated, it's actually it's quite clear, because there's a very clear formula in terms of how to calculate that severance and the notice period. Provincially, it's different. There's a base amount that you're required to pay somebody based on his or her years of service, and then over and above that, it becomes based on common law. So how a similar situation was handled in the past would be how you would be required to handle it in your case. So they're not easy to come up with a dollar figure. So in those cases, especially with someone who's a seasoned member of your team or has been around for a long time, definitely encourage you to reach out and seek legal assistance in terms of determining what a proper severance package might look like. And so just is really important to understand the differences between the two. Oftentimes people are confused with a layoff or a job elimination. Those are considered without cause terminations as well. So again, there would be money that you would be needing to pay that employee. Probationary, I threw that in there too as well, just to kind of highlight. And again, depending on where you're located and how you're regulated, it's usually either 3 months or 90-day probationary. So basically, what that means is both you as the employer and the employee hold similar rights. So at any time during that first or that probationary period, however long it may be, the employee may decide that he or she doesn't want to be a part of your organization anymore and can leave without giving you any notice. And you hold that same right as the employer. So at any time during that probationary period, you may decide for whatever reason that you don't want the person part of your team, and in which case you can release them, again, without notice, without having to pay any money, so on and so forth. Now, I will caution folks, because although it's for any reason, you still have to make sure it isn't discriminatory. So sometimes people think that, with the probationary period is sort of a free-for-all. And in a sense, it is, but in some ways it is not. So, for example, not that anyone on this call would ever do this, but if you were going to release somebody on probation because you found out that they were expecting a baby, or that they had a particular background that didn't agree with yours, those are discriminatory reasons. And at any time during an employment period, you're not allowed to release somebody for discriminatory reasons. So just wanted to highlight that important part there. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention here. No, I think that's it. You can probably go to the next slide, Jackie. Okay, so document. With any kind of termination document, and documentation and details are critical. For for example, in a just cause termination, you will need a lengthy, well-documented paper trail, complete with any warnings that you've given that employee over that period, any formal acknowledgements in terms of policies that they've signed off or acknowledged, anything like that. So again, with just cause, it's very, very difficult to prove. Even though it may seem black and white to you, it's very unlikely that it will seem so to outside third parties. So please take the time to make sure that you've got everything documented and that you can back everything up and make a real solid case. On the other hand, without cause termination is not all that different because and oftentimes will require even more documentation because you have to be able to prove with certainty that you had your own justification to terminate. So what that would look like is a series of discipline based on, for example, lateness. You have to show the courts or anyone investigating that you had several discussions with that individual, that they've acknowledged those discussions, that they've been warned that repeat offenses will result in a next level infraction, so on and so forth. So you want to, again, have a very clear, well-documented paper trail, which actually goes back to my earlier comment on having a clear, transparent, progressive discipline policy. So again, really important to dot the I's and cross the T's, as the saying goes, to make sure that you have your ducks in a row. It's also really important to make sure that throughout the process that you're, if necessary, and most of the times it is to a certain extent, but to conduct some kind of an investigation, is if you think you're kind of going down that path, certainly reach out to your HR folks at your company. If you don't have an HR department, seek somebody who can help you, a trusted third party or perhaps another member of your senior management team who has some experience in this. This might include someone involved in getting some witness statements for you, collecting video footage, so on and so forth. Again, it's not always a paper trail, but you want to have the necessary backup and make sure that you've investigated fully so that you are actually making the right decision in the end as well. Next slide, please. So timing and location of termination meetings, this comes up as a question from employers quite often. The rule of thumb, this has been around for some time, is to never terminate on a Friday. Reason for that is if the person is a Monday to Friday employee and you let them go on a Friday, you've eliminated their opportunity to seek advice from an attorney for at least 2 days, because as we know, law offices are not open on the weekend. So that's not a good situation to put somebody in. It also is a really poor way to end a work week. So even though, and I'll speak to this a little bit later, even though you may have decided to terminate a relationship, you still need to handle that with respect and dignity, keeping that person's respect and dignity intact at all times. And terminating at the end of their week, Friday, is not appropriate. So generally speaking, early to midweek is the best time to terminate. People have often asked, better to do it in the morning or the afternoon, and really, I think that really depends on the structure of your organization, on the different shifts that you might have, who may or may not be around the office, those kinds of logistics that you'd have to consider. That would be more of a kind of a personal decision. The other thing you should always consider is any other significant or important dates that might be sensitive to that employee. So, for example, you'll want to do it on their birthday, and oftentimes you don't realize when someone's birthday may be, or you don't want to do it on their work anniversary. So again, just from a sensitivity perspective, just make sure you're checking into all those things before you set the date. The other thing to do, and although this may seem to go without saying, I've seen this happen before, where there isn't privacy, but make sure that you have arranged for complete privacy. So if you have a separate room, a boardroom, an HR office that you can have this termination meeting in, rather than your own office, I would encourage you to do that. I realize that not all work environments are set up that way, but if you do need to use your own office, please make sure that your phone is off, that your door is closed, and that the people around you know not to interrupt you during that time. Because there would be nothing is more awkward than being interrupted in a meeting such as this. Next slide, please. Okay, so sort of moving down the path, you now know that you've done your homework, you've done your due diligence, you've sought advice if necessary, and you are going to make a decision to terminate an employee. What should you put in the termination letter? And a common mistake that I've seen employers make is getting into too much detail. It's not necessary, nor necessarily even appropriate, to put all the details into a termination letter. The phrase "less is more" is pertinent here. So, a termination letter should be roughly 4 short paragraphs long. You want to get straight to the point and avoid any unnecessary details. So you might say something like, this letter is to inform you that your employment is being terminated effective today for repeated violations of our workplace tardiness and absenteeism policy. So you don't need to get into how many times it was, how late they were. You've already done all of that, and you have all of that information already if you've done your job properly. So no need to go down that path. And quite honestly, if this is the point that you're at and you've had repeated discussions with the employee should not be surprised. So they should already know. Explain critical pieces of information in the letter. So I put some points here that you might want to consider. This may sound obvious, but you want to actually put in when the effective date is. Sometimes in a layoff situation, for example, you may be giving somebody notice, but their actual last day is perhaps 4 weeks from the day you're speaking to them. So make sure it's really clear in there when their last day is. Most of the time it's the day you're talking to them, but again, not always. Let them know in the letter if they have benefits, how long are the benefits going to be active for, and if you have an employee assistance program, for example, is that going to continue for a period of time? Or maybe it's one or the other, but whatever your policy is, make sure you clearly lay that out. You also want to indicate to them when they'll get their final paycheck and their record of employment. And again, depending on where you're located, there's different rules around that, but you want to indicate in the letter when they can expect that. It's also a good idea, although not required, to address the issue of references. So you, for example, your company may have a policy where you simply don't give out references, and that's fine, but make sure that you let them know that. And you don't have to put that in the letter. You can verbally tell them, but if you would like, you can put that in the letter as well. And also indicate to whom they should direct the reference to. So perhaps you want all of your references vetted through the Human Resources Department, so indicate that in the letter as well. And identify who their on-site contact is. So after all is said and done, they've gone home for the day and they have questions, indicate in the letter who they should be contacting so that there's no question and they know who their on-site is. And finally, if applicable, you want to list the severance details and the release, if applicable. So again, we'll get into the release a little bit more later, but if it is a termination where you are giving a severance, you want to indicate the severance amount as well as the required minimum notice paid as well. So there's 2 different pieces there. Okay, next slide. All right, so who attends or should attend the termination meeting? Certainly the employee's direct manager or supervisor should be attending, and that is the individual who would then be delivering the message that the employment has been terminated. You also want to make sure that you have another person in the room. If you have a human resources member, you would definitely want to have him or her in the room with you. If you don't have a human resources department, select another senior team leader or trusted senior member of your team. And that person's role is a couple of things. It's to witness the conversation and also to stay with that person after the employee's manager has left, after they've given the message, and go through the letter, collect any belongings that they might need from them, make sure that they have a safe way home, exit them out of the building, all of those kinds of things. So that's the reason why that you want to have 2 people in the room. And more than 2 is a little bit of overkill. I would never recommend that unless it's a unique situation, but certainly you want to have at least 2. Next slide, please. Okay, so talking a little bit about logistics. So you've now moved down this path. You've planned everything out. You've got the letter ready to go. The day is approaching. So what are some things you want to sort of do as that day moves closer? would highly recommend planning and rehearsing as many times as you feel necessary. Now, although terminating somebody will never ever be something that you're comfortable with, fortunately or unfortunately for myself, I've sat in hundreds of these, and I will tell you that they don't get any easier. I will say that that is normal and that is to be expected. But having said that, the more you can plan and rehearse what you're going to say and play out different scenarios, the more comfortable that, in quotation marks, you will be. So I really am a big believer in using role plays. So oftentimes what that will look like is I will work with the manager leading up to the termination meeting and we'll play out scenarios, because you never know how someone is going to react. And in my experience, it's often the people that you least expect to react that they will actually react, more so than someone who you think will react, and those people usually don't react. And then there's everything in between. So what I'll often do with the manager is sit across from him or her. They'll say to me their message. I will listen to it and I will react different ways. So I'll throw different scenarios. I'll perhaps get up and slam my fists on the table and do different things just so that they know how they might react in that situation, so that if something does happen that's out of the ordinary or not expected in the actual scenario, at least they have a little bit of a sense as to how they should be reacting. So it's a safe place to do that. It's not, no one, I don't think, really loves role playing, but they really are beneficial, and people find them very, very valuable. You want to also consider security. So what I mean by that, it doesn't have to be a professional security company or someone on your staff that's trained in security, but it's sometimes appropriate, depending on the situation involved, and you can use your good discretion with that, is to have somebody just sort of on backup or just on lookout. And I've had that in a couple of scenarios where I've been involved and they thought someone might act out. There was someone sort of waiting outside the door just to listen for any outbursts or anything like that. So it may or may not be necessary, but again, use your discretion, but have a discussion about it and decide if you think it's necessary. The other part of security too, and we'll get to this in a couple of points about, oftentimes employees will come back to the workplace, after everyone has gone home to collect their belongings from their desk, so it's not awkward for themselves or others. And I've been involved in those situations too, where I've been that person there while they're cleaning out their belongings, and having somebody nearby that's not visible, but that is there in case that person became angry. At least I would have assistance to back me up. So again, use your discretion with that, but certainly consider that. I'm just going to pause quickly here because I apologize. I've got a question here from somebody that asked if termination letters are a must. I would say, legally speaking, no, but I would say they are a must. They'll help you if ever something happens down the line, there's a claim made or this or that. Because if you, I guess, maybe better explained, if you don't have one, an employee can tell a lawyer, an investigator, any reason why you terminated them. And really, it's their word against your word. And I will tell you, and many of you on the call will probably have this experience too, whenever there's a doubt between the employer and the employee, from a government or a legal standpoint, always they err on the side of the employees. Always. It's just how the system works. I don't like it. Most people don't like it. That's just the world in which we live. So protect yourself and put the effort in. And it really isn't a lot of effort, to be honest, to put it together, a termination letter. But I would say absolutely do that. Okay, so coming back to this slide, also back to logistics, what do you need to collect from the employee? So does the employee have passwords that only he or she knows? Do they have keys to a particular area or filing cabinets? Do they have a company cell phone, a company laptop? So make a list of everything that you need to collect back from that employee so that you're not scrambling that day and thinking, oh gosh, did we get this, did we get that? Because how awkward is it to have to call that employee after the fact, and how willing are they going to be to help you after the fact? So do all of that at the time of the termination meeting. And again, back to my earlier comment, how will the employee obtain his or her belongings? And this is less of an issue in some senses and a very big issue in others. someone who's been a long-term employee with you in an office environment, as an example, probably has lots of pictures, personal effects at their desk, in their desk, and it's something that you don't want, but they do. But it's not appropriate for them to make filing things in a box while everybody around them is working. So arrange for a time where it's more discreet for him or her to come back to collect their belongings. And some organizations even offer to do that for the employee and courier it to their home. So again, think about that as well. You also want to consider, again, based on where you're going to be having this termination meeting and how everything is set up in your organization, but how will the person exit the building? And again, to my last point there, maintaining the dignity of the employee through this entire process is paramount. You do not, and there's no reason why you would want to make it more difficult for them than it already is. Yes, the employment relationship is ending, but certainly you don't want to give them any reason to speak poorly about the way you handled this exit. So be respectful, be discreet. If you don't need to escort them out, don't. Sometimes you do. But again, that's on a case-by-case basis, but really give that time and consideration to discuss this for you and your organization. Next slide, please. Okay, so delivering the message, the day has come. So you've done all of this and leading up to the actual day, it's okay, what do I say? And this is where things can go bad very, very quickly. In my experience, although this may sound cold and it may sound harsh to some of you, but in fact, I feel it's the most respectful way you can deliver this kind of a message is just to cut straight to the point. So when the person comes into the office, likely they've already kind of seen this coming. And if they haven't, as soon as you bring them into your office and the HR person is there or another member of the senior management team is sitting there, they're going to know something is up. So immediately they're on guard. So you want to avoid the, hey, how was your drive into work today and all that. Just don't go there. Just cut straight to the chase and say, so-and-so, this is a very difficult message. I need to tell you that your employment is being terminated effective today. Today is your last day. This decision is final. That is the role of the person's direct manager or supervisor. That is all that they say. There's a pause. You don't invite questions, and you do not get into a debate or extensive discussions of any kind. And again, this may sound harsh, but really honestly, there's no point in getting into a big debate or discussion because one, you're not changing your mind. Two, nothing good can come from that. And three, the person is likely not going to remember much at all of anything that's said after you've said it. So it's really, there's no point in any of that. So then after that point, the manager would leave the room, leaving the employee with the HR rep or the senior manager or company representative that you've chosen. And that person's role is to, just make sure that they're doing okay, that they've understand what's in the letter. You collect the belongings. If they're emotional, you wait with them until they're okay. You make sure that they have a safe ride home. So that may involve calling a taxi cab. Some people react very emotionally, understandably so, and are clearly not okay to get themselves home. Now, I would never recommend that you drive them home or anyone on your team for lots of reasons, but you can certainly call a taxi or have someone sit with them until so just consider all of those things as well when you're planning your meeting. So, really the supervisor's role is quick. So they're in and out of there within a minute, right? So their time frame is quite quick, but yours, if you're the person sitting with the employee after, it might be a little bit longer. Generally, they're not. Generally, this whole process is less than 10 minutes long, and they're gone. So, and that's the ideal scenario. If you can keep it under 10 minutes, it's kind of the textbook termination meeting. So you've done well. So that's kind of, some things to consider. And again, I realize that may sound be uncomfortable to some folks on the call, but it really is the best way to deliver this very difficult message. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're wrapping up, getting towards the end of the call or the webinar here. So just a couple more things to mention. So after the person has left the building, they're gone, there's a few things that you need to make sure you still address. The first point here is recap the details of that termination meeting and secure them in a location where the need-to-know individuals will have access to them. So what I mean by that is you would, if you're, say, it's the person that's been sitting with them the whole time. So the HR person or the company representative that served as a witness would recap the details. So met with John and Steve at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning in the boardroom. John said, this, and you recap exactly what was said, what was transpired, any particular details that might be valuable later on if there's any kind of litigation or claim. You want to record that. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, you forget. Time passes, 6 months later, something comes up and you need to recall something. You don't really recall. You have a vague idea, but really you've probably forgotten a lot of the finer details. So when you do it right after the fact, you're ensuring to yourself that you've got the actual, right details, that they're accurate, that they're complete, and everything is there. The other thing is perhaps something happens to that witness. They're no longer with your company down the line when you need to know the information. So again, that's why you want to secure it someplace where everybody who needs to have access or would need to have access to that will have access to that. Now, 9 times out of 10, you're never going to need to refer to that. But I will tell you, I had a recent example this past year where I did need to refer to that, and I was sure glad I had those post-mortem notes because there were some differences of opinion on what kind of had transpired, and those were really beneficial to the organization that we had those that were recorded at the time of the event. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you cancel any computer or software or building access immediately. And perhaps even at certain situations, you might want to give your IT folks a heads up so that they can do that while the meeting is actually taking place. And the reason for that is you don't want an angry former employee all of a sudden accessing some of your information, deleting it, changing it, forwarding it, taking it, doing something inappropriate with it. So you want to secure all of your assets and make sure that's locked down. Thirdly, you want to meet with the employees' coworkers or any people that they work closely with to tell them that they're no longer with the company. You don't want to share any details ever. If the employee decides to share details with their former coworkers, that's up to them. That should never come from you. You just indicate they're no longer with you, and then also let them know in the interim who is their contact person. So if there's a project going on that the person was involved in, who is now taking on that role. And then finally, you want to communicate with any external contacts as appropriate. So this often is a case if there's a sales position or marketing position or any senior executive position where they've had lots of contact with external stakeholders. Be sure that you send out appropriate information. Sometimes that's a phone call, sometimes an email is fine. Again, using your good discretion on that. I think, yeah, that's really all for the post-mortem, and that actually leads to the wrap-up. You can go to the next slide, ladies. If there's any questions, I don't see any more new ones coming up here. But if there are any last-minute questions, I see someone is maybe typing. And then if you want to go to the next slide while we're waiting for the question, I'll just kind of share with you some resources. And again, as you know, this webinar is being recorded. You can access it later. But again, there's some links there to further information on termination and things you need to know depending on if you're provincially regulated, if you are in Saskatchewan, federally regulated, and then there's also the HR Council of Canada as well. So final slide is my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I would love to know your thoughts on today's webinar. If you have questions, comments, concerns, happy to take calls or emails after the fact. And I don't think that there actually is any other questions. I think nope, nothing has come up. So if there's nothing else, I will thank everybody for joining today's call or today's webinar, and wishing you a good rest of the day.
Well, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Janelle for taking the time to share her insights today. Your webinar was incredibly valuable and to help ease the stress of terminations, which is always a rough subject. So thank you very much. I also want to say thank you to everyone that was able to join us on this webinar. Our next upcoming webinar, how to leverage your personal Facebook profile for business. And that is on February 20th, and our presenter is Brandy Good of BLG Business Solutions. So please check your WESP emails or visit our website to register. All right, well, thank you everyone, and I wish everyone a great afternoon.